Well, hello, Stram. Opa. How y'all doing? How are we on this fine day? Oh no. Oh no. Oh my god. There's quite a lot of clicks happening here.
Legacy. Legacy Books presents The Firemage's Vengeance, a book of Underrealm. A Book of Underrealm. Book 3. Underrealm. Book 3 of the Academy Journal. Of Three of the Academy Journals. Find Academy Journals. Find all the works of Underrealm at underrealm.net/books. Underrealm at underrealm.net/books. Chapter 1. Books. Chapter 1. The Firemage's Vengeance. Chapter 1. Chapter 1. Chapter 1. One. Chapter 1. 1. 1. Chapter 1. The snow that fell in those middle days of Martis did nothing to chill the air. Nothing. Air. Chill the air. Nothing, that is, when compared to the ice in Eben's heart. The frost in Eben's heart. The frost inside him was made of fear and dread, and if asked, he would have called fear and dread, and if asked, he would have called it more frigid than the winds and snow that blew in his face. For the winter within, for his face, for the winter within kept him from notice. For the winter within kept him from noticing the winter without. Without. He led Caleb and noticing the winter without. He led Caleb and without. He led Caleb and Theron through the streets of the High King's seat. His friend Chapter 3. Chapter 2. Seat. His friends felt the same. Seat. His friends felt the same, he knew. Theron knew. Theron huddled deeper under her hood. She had not bothered to She had not bothered to dye her hair in some time, and her dark roots showed through the blonde, though that hardly mattered, since her head was rarely uncovered these days. Calum wrapped his arms tight about himself, pale cheeks glowing red as his hair against winter's gales, and his spindly limbs shook whenever he stayed in one place too long. Yet Eben guessed that neither of them were any more aware of the weather than he was. They had greater troubles, ones that plagued them day and too long. Yet Eben guessed that neither of them were any more aware of the weather than he was. They had greater troubles, ones that ones that plagued them day and night. Their studies suffered. They had greater troubles, ones that plagued them day and night. Their studies suffered, and in the midst of conversation, their thoughts drifted away. They were left staring at nothing in the middle of the dining hall, and their thoughts drifted away. They were left staring at nothing in the middle of the dining hall, and their worries kept them lying awake in their beds late into the night. Late into the night. The first was Dasco, the instructor they had.
Quick bathroom.
The instructor they held in bondage, though they did not ask go. The instructor they held in bondage, though they did not wish to. The second The second was Aaron, the dean's son, who was captive or dead. And the third was his Aaron. Second was Aaron, the dean's son, who was captive or dead. And the third was his captor, Ezra, who had vanished from all sight and knowledge, a trail of corpses in her wake. This is a in her wake. This is a fool's errand, said Theron, bringing Eben's mind back to the present. It is no errand at all. Back to the present. It is no errand at all, said Eben. All, said Eben. We are invited. And why did we accept? Said Eben. We are invited. Invited. And why did we... Invited. And why did we accept? What if something happens to... We accept. What if something happens to Dask? What if... To Dask? What if something happens back at the academy while we are gone? We... On. We cannot watch him every hour of every day, Theron. Caleb. Hey, Theron. Caleb's voice held a note of careful reproach. Reproach. Indeed, we do not spend much time with him as it is. Yet we are always near, Theron insisted. If our control should slip, if we are discovered, we should slip. If we are discovered, we will be discovered, said Eben. Be discovered, said Eben. Caleb. Said Eben. Caleb is right. We cannot spend our every hour sitting on our hands, half in hope and half in fear. half in fear. You say that more easily than I would, Theron muttered. Eben couldn't... Theron muttered. Eben could not tell if she had meant for him to hear it or not, but he did not blame her either way. She had the most to fear in all this untenable situation. At long last, At long last, the black iron gate of the Drayden family's manor At long last, the black iron gate of the Drayden family's manor loomed before them. Once the guards spied 3 academy students making their way through the snowdrifts, they hastened to draw the gate open. Eben shook out his boots on the cobblestones of the courtyard. Cobblestones of the courtyard. Cobblestone. Boots on the cobblestones of the courtyard, which was better swept than the streets had been. He had never spent winter in the northern lands. At home in Idris, winters were colder but drier, and snow was an elf tale. To him, this type of winter seemed a deadly danger. Though Theron assured him it was in fact very mild this year. A happy shout proceeded a short, plump figure bounding towards them, and Eben recognized his sister, Albie, beneath a furred hood. She hugged him first, and he grinned as he hoisted her up off the ground. But then she embraced Calum just as warm. But then she embraced Calum just as warmly, and Eben's mouth soured. Theron she gave a more customary greeting. Both hands clasped at once, she bowed. Theron rolled her eyes, but returned the greeting without complaint. I thought the 3 of you would never come, Albie said. Her voice seemed Albi said. Her voice seemed uncommonly loud after the dead quiet of the snow-covered streets, and after the anxious, hushed words Eben had shared with his friends. But then, it seems much later than it is. With his friends. But then, it seems much later than it is, for the sky is so dark and gray. Come inside. Halab eagerly awaits you. We will, and gladly, said Eben. We will. We will, and gladly. Will, and gladly, said Eben. And gladly, said Eben, forcing a smile. Northern winters suit me ill. Albi. Me ill. Albi laughed and led them in. Both hearths burned. And led them in. Both hearths burned in the wide front hall, and Eben sighed in relief at the warmth of them. He cast He cast back his hood and bent to remove his boots. They were boots. They were gifts. They were gifts Halab had sent only recently. Black to follow the Academy's rules, but lime rules.
Ooh, that's a hell of a mouth noise.
Rules. Rules, but lined with gray fur and laced up to just below the knee. Theron and Calum, too, had received their own pairs, but Theron almost forgot to remove hers, and had to be reminded by a sharp word from Calum. Unshod, they climbed the stairs to the lounge where Halab awaited them. She rose at once. She rose at once and came forwards with a smile. Her dress was ochre and Her dress was ochre and white, like fine-spun gold dusted with snow. Though all faces were Though all faces were paler now in the waning sunlight, Eben thought she had never looked lovelier. Dearest nephew, she said. She said, reaching for him. He kissed her cheeks, and then she bowed to Calum and Theron. Calum flushed, and Eben knew the boy was thinking of the first time they had met, when he had kissed Halab's cheeks. Theron, for her part, did not roll her eyes so hard as she had with Albi. Eben knew the high estimate. Albie. Eben knew the high estimation in which she held his aunt. Our heartfelt thanks for your hospitality. Held his aunt. Our heartfelt thanks for your hospitality, especially in the depths of winter's chill, said Caleb. But chill, said Caleb. But that is when hospitality is needed the most, said Halab with a smile. Dinner had been prepared already. A smile. Dinner had been prepared. Smile. Dinner had been prepared. Dinner had been. Dinner had been. Dinner had been. Bob with a smile. Dinner had been prepared already, and was brought from the kitchens to be uncovered for them. They ate. To be uncovered for them. They ate ravenously, for all three of them felt their appetites could hardly be sated these days. Halab. Halab laughed as she saw them devour their meals, and quipped that the three of them must be growing. Eben thought to himself that the likelier explanation was the oppressive cold. When When snow made walking a chore, even after a small distance, he seemed to need thrice as much food just to remain upright. After she took them back to the lounge, where they sat and talked of small things, their classes and their friends. Only Caleb had any of these out. Only Caleb. Only Caleb had any of these. Had any of these. Had any of these. Only Caleb had any of these outside the present company, and the little bits of news Halab thought they might enjoy hearing. But as happened so often in the academy, Halab thought they might enjoy hearing. But, as happened so often in the academy itself these days, Eben often found his mind wandering, and he saw the same in his Eben often found his mind wandering, and he saw the same in his friends. Halab noted. name in his friends. Halab noticed it. His friends. Halab noticed it as well. Often did as well. Often he found her looking at the three of them, a question in her eyes, her lips pursed. At last, her lips pursed. At last he leaned forwards and grimaced in apology. I am sorry. In apology. I am sorry, dearest aunt. The three of us have made terrible guests, I fear. Made terrible guests. Guest. Terrible guests. Made terrible guests, I fear. Halab shook her head at once. At once. It is I who should apologize. I have... I have taken little consideration for the troubles the three of you bear. I have heard of the Academy's rogue student and the Dean's son who she stole away. No doubt... Stole away. No doubt such dark thought... Away. No doubt such dark thoughts are what trouble you. Eben... Are what trouble you. Eben studied his fingernails, not wishing to meet her eyes. She was right. Her eyes. She was right about Ezra, of course, but she did not know just how intimately the matter concerned Eben, nor how often he heard Aaron's screams as the boy was dragged away. Mako, it seemed clear, had not... dragged away. Mako, it seemed clear, had not told her of what transpired in Zane's home. Caleb spoke. Zane's home. Caleb spoke, as Eben did not seem to wish to. It is It is a dark time for the school indeed, he said quietly. In one sense, the danger that said quietly. In one sense, the danger that plagued us is gone, for everyone believes that Ezra has fled the seat. But the dark fled the seat. but the darkness she left behind her is not so easily cast aside. The room cast aside. The room fell to silence as Eben and his friends stared at the floor. When he glanced at Albie, Eben was surprised to see that she looked bored. But Halab wore a vaguely mournful look. She sat straight. Mournful look. She sat straighter and put her wine goblet on a side table. If it is not too great a request, I should like a word alone with my nephew. Theron and Caleb. Theron and Caleb straightened at once. Not at all. Caleb straightened at once. Not at all, said Theron, ducking her head in a sort of sitting bow. We have...
BRB, gotta handle dogs. Dogs have been handled.
Ow. We have troubled you long enough as it is. We have troubled you long... you long sitting back. We have troubled you long enough as it is. Troubled you long enough as it is. I have enjoyed your company, said Halab with a smile. This... with a smile. This is only a little matter, and afterwards I must leave for the High King's palace. Albi, will you... High King's palace. Albi, will you please... Will you please... Albi looked burningly curious, but she sighed and led Eben's friends away. But she sighed and led Eben's friends away. Come, young... Eben's friends away. Come, young Master Connor, she said, holding out her... she said, holding out her arm. She said, holding out her arm. Our garden... her arm. Our gardens are nearly frozen over, but you and I can keep each other warm regardless. Eben regardless. Eben glowered as she took them towards the staircase down. Halab gave... down. Halab gave a soft chuckle after they had gone from view. Yes. On from view. Your sister seems very taken with young Calum. I have noticed. Calum, I have noticed, said Eben, mouth puckered. Again... mouth puckered. Again Halab laughed, and heartier this time. You should not... heartier this time. You should not worry. She is only having some amusement. Albi knows full... amusement. Albi knows full well that Calum's parents will never accept her as a bride. The words came... a bride. The words came from nowhere, and Eben sat a bit straighter in his seat. Why not? It is nothing to do with Albi her... Why not? It is nothing to do with Albi herself. She will make a fine wife herself. She will make a fine wife someday if she meets someone who knows not to get in her way. But the royalty are in her way. But the royalty are reluctant, shall we say, to allow us merchants any more power than they think we deserve. She smirked, as though... deserve. She smirked, as though at some hidden joke just remembered. Eben frowned. I am... Eben frowned. I am not sure I understand. Halab sighed. Understand. Halab sighed. Halab sighed. That is... Halab sighed. That is just as well. It is a complicated matter, and more so... as well. It is a complicated matter, and more so as time goes on. But... as time goes on. But Albie knows enough of it to keep her heart safe. She means only to have a little fun with her heart safe. She means only to have a little fun with Caleb. Nothing more. In truth, Eben was nothing more. In truth, Eben was more worried about Caleb than about Albie. It seemed
Need to grab some coffee.
about Albie. It seemed clear to him that Albie saw Caleb as a plaything, but Caleb did not look upon her the same way. The royal boy had same way. The royal boy had had many conversations with Eben on the subjects of love and intimacy and other things besides. But he pushed these thoughts away, for he doubted that Halab wished to speak with him on matters of love or matchmaking. Now she straightened and placed her feet on the floor rather than draped along the seat, and patted the spot beside her. Eben rose and went to her, just as she reached into a nearby drawer. From it she pulled a small iron trinket in the shape of an ankh. This she placed into his open palm. "Here," she said. "Here," she said. This is for you." Eben was taken aback. was taken aback. "Thank you, dearest aunt." He looked at it curiously. The ankh The ankh was the symbol of their house and was featured upon their crest. Yet he wondered exactly why she would give him crest. Yet he wondered exactly why she would give him this, for it seemed to bear little purpose. She had to know they were allowed to keep few possessions in the academy. Halab must have seen some of his confusion in his eyes, for she smiled and took it from him. It is not only a trinket. What? A trinket. Watch. She pressed the handle in. Watch. She pressed the handle into the spars, and with a small skirch, sparks sprang out from the tip. "A fire striker," said Eben. He took it back. "Striker," said Eben. He took it back, a bit more eagerly. That is most cleverly made. That is most cleverly made. Specially crafted. Cleverly made. Specially crafted when I was a child, she said. It is... She said, "It is of Calentin make, among craftsmen. Among craftsmen, their artisans have no equal. Thank you." Have no equal. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you," he said, and this time he meant it. "I will keep it with me." "I will keep it with me always." "Always. That would please me," she said. Then she sighed. And took his hands in hers. "This brings me to the next matter. You must know by now that your father has no intention of letting you keep your inheritance. That will pass to Albie." Eben stared at his lap. "She let something of that slip," he muttered. "And I am sure you at least half guessed." that slip, he muttered. And I am sure you at least half guessed it before. Just half guessed it. Half guessed it before. Guessed it before. Half guessed it before. Half guessed it before. You have always been half guessed it before. You have always been a wise boy. That means you will never get wise boy. That means you will never get your mark. The mark of their your mark. The mark of their house was scarified on the skin of those who entered the family service, on the wrist of the right arm. Father had right arm. Father had his, and Eben's brother Momen had had one as well. Eben had long anticipated one as well. Eben had long anticipated receiving his own mark, though the prospect lost more of its luster the older he grew. More of its luster. Lost more of its luster the older he grew. But he forced a smile and the older he grew. But he forced a smile and looked at her. Well, that is no great looked at her. Well, that is no great loss. I will be a wizard after all. Great loss. I will be a wizard after all. How many of our kin can say after all? How many of our kin can say the same? Say the same. Halab gave him a sad smile. I want you to know, she said softly. Halab gave him a sad smile. I want you to know, she said softly, that if any but a No, she said softly, that if any but a parent could grant softly, that if any but a parent could grant the mark, I would give it to you myself, and for those who obey me, to you myself, and for those who obey me, this fire striker will serve just as well as a symbol upon your skin. You will never want for help upon your skin. You will never want for help from my house while you bear it. His eyes stung. While you bear it. His eyes stung. Thank you, Halab. Eyes stung. Thank you, Halab. I am an even poorer... Thank you, Halab. I am an even poorer guest now, for I have no gift in return. It is... I have no gift in return. It is the joy of the old to provide for the young. She leaned back and took... for the young. She leaned back and took her wine goblet again. Until very until goblet again. Until very recently, I half thought I should give you a dagger. The Academy has not been... A dagger. The Academy has not been a place free from peril, though it seems that danger has now passed. Eben's mood passed. Eben's mood fell, for her words drew his thoughts back to Aaron and Dasco. I suppose it... and Dasco. I suppose it no longer plagues me, nor my friends, he said carefully. But that does not mean there is... But that does... he said carefully. But that does not mean there is no danger at all. You speak of the Dean's son, yes? No danger at all. You speak of the Dean's son, yes? You speak of the Dean's son, yes? Aaron of the family Foradar, is it not? The Dean's son, yes? Aaron of the family Foradar, is it not? Yes. The rogue student. Is it not? Yes. The rogue student, Ezra. She took him, and no one knows where. Odd that... And no one knows where. Odd that she should escape both the High King's guards and the constables. I have heard... Constables. I have heard even the mystics lend their eyes to the search. Eben stared at... eyes to the search. Eben stared... their eyes to the search. Eben stared at his feet, fearful she would see the torment within him if he looked at her. They say his father... He looked at her. They say his father, Zane, the Academy's dean, is favored by the High King. I met him once. The boy. Favored by the High King. I met him once. The boy. Aaron, I mean. Briefly, only. Aaron, I mean. Briefly, only. The boy, Aaron, I mean. Briefly, only. Yet I would not see him come to harm. He heard again Aaron. Yet I would not see him come to harm. Come to harm. Harm, 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 harm. Come to harm. Harm. He heard again Aaron's cries for help as the boy was pulled into the streets. Unconsciously, his the streets. Unconsciously. To the streets. Unconsciously, his lips twisted in imitation of Ezra's snarl. Zane... Ezra's snarl. Zane of the family Foradar has always been difficult, said Halab. There was no... Halab. There was no mistaking the irritation in her voice. To our family, I mean. To our family, I mean. Cyrus in particular earned his ire, as did your uncle Matami. At that, the room... Matami. At that, the room fell to swift silence. Eben's gaze darted about. Silence. Eben's gaze darted about, seeking somewhere to rest. His own wine His own wine goblet sat unattended, and he took it to refill, all the while avoiding Halab's watchful attention. The last time The last time Eben had seen his uncle, it had been when Mako killed him slow in the sewers killed him slow. Killed him slow in the sewers beneath the city. Eben still remembered the city. Eben still remembered the empty gap where Matami's eye had been, the bloodied stumps of his fingers. He drank deep from his goblet. His fingers. He drank deep from his goblet and filled it once more. When at last he looked once more. When at last he looked to Halab, her face was stony, but her eyes glinted with tears expertly held back. Mako had Mako had said that Halab would know or guessed at what happened to Matami, but he had said also or guessed at what happened to Matami, but he guessed at what happened to Matami, but he had said also that she would not mention it. Sometimes not mention it. Sometimes it was easier that way, that the truth be known, but unspoken. Known, but unspoken. Halab rustled her shoulder. Spoken. Halab rustled her shoulders, and it was as if she shook off a cloak that had kept her mood solemn. She graced Eben with She graced Eben with a smile that hardly seemed forced, and put her hands upon his shoulders. I want you to know, Eben, that you are the closest thing to my own son, and I could want for nothing more. The pain and danger you have suffered of late weigh upon me, and I am glad such suffering has passed you by. If ever you need something If ever you need something from me, anything at all, you have only to ask. Eben's throat seized up. He had never heard such soft words from his own parents. Forgetting his own parents. Forgetting his manners, he seized Talab in a tight hug. How could I? Tight hug. How could I ask anything of you, when already you have been my one bright light in dark times? She let him hold her for times. She let him hold her for a moment. Let him hold her for a moment. Him hold her. She let him hold her for a moment, and then gently urged him away. Go now, dearest nephew. Him away. Go now, dearest nephew. I must leave. Dearest nephew. I must leave, so rejoin your friends and your sister. The shadow has passed. Your sister. The shadow has passed. Enjoy the daylight while it remains. He smiled. He smiled. He smiled in answer and held it until she left the room. Then his face the room. Then his face fell, and he put a hand to his forehead. Fell, and he put a hand to his forehead, remembering Matami's empty eyes.
Oh, boy. Chapter 1 is done. That took longer than it should have. But we did have interruptions. Gonna take a brief break and be back in like 10 minutes or so. Catch you then. Well, hello. We're back.
The Firemage's Vengeance, Chapter 2. Chapter 3. Chapter 2. The garden was like a stage play, for it was hushed and fresh, the white snow forming a platform waiting for its actors to arrive. The quiet of winter's air was like the audience standing in the pit below, breath held eagerly in anticipation, hearts thrumming with promise. Eben stepped into it. Anticipation, hearts thrumming with promise. Eben stepped into it, and for a moment he paused there in the door. He closed his eyes. He closed his eyes, breathing deep to take in the smell. Then, far off, Then, far off, he heard Alby's bright laugh. He opened his eyes with a sigh and set off down the path to find her. She and Calum and Theron were among the hedges, walking aimlessly along winding paths. He could see from their footprints that they had walked in many circles already. Alby still held tight. Alby still held tight to Calum's arm, and Calum was pressed against her side, though he flushed and parted from her slightly when he saw Evan. Behind them, Theron had a long, suffering look on her face, and her relief at Eben's arrival was obvious. "You and Halab must have shared heartfelt words," said Alby, smiling at him. I can see your eyes clouded in thought." "We did," Eben said. "We did," Eben said quietly, "and she gave me this." From his pocket, he withdrew the fire striker and held it up. Alby tilted her head. Alby tilted her head. Why, that was Uncle Matami. Why, that was Uncle Matami's. I saw him use it on the road with... Tommy's. I saw him use it on the road we took here from Idris. Sometimes he would strike it absent-mindedly as we drove, his thoughts wandering elsewhere and his hands seeking something to do. That put a sick feeling in the pit of Eben's stomach. He looked at the fire striker anew. It had to be a message. Had Halab simply meant to tell Eben that she knew of Matami's death? Or was it a token of forgiveness, absolving us? Absolving him of blame for his part in the murder. He had been silent. He had been silent too long, and they were staring at him. What have the three of you been speaking of? I was telling Calum of the caravan I will soon lead, said Alby. I will take the wagons back home to Idris, though not their... I will take the wagons back home to Idris, though not directly, for that would bring us far too close to Dolmoon, and there is a war on, after all. First we will sail to Selvin. After all. First we will sail to Selvin. First we will sail... We will sail... We will sail to Selvin, there to take... To Selvin, there to take... To Selvin, there to take the King's Road until it reaches the Dragon's Tail River. We will sail upon those waters until they... Dragon's Tail River. We will sail upon those waters until they reach the King's Road again, and then drive... Again, and then drive east until we are home. I am most excited about the... Our home. I am most excited about the whole thing. But Eben was gaping at... But Eben was gaping at her. You will lead the caravan? Gaping at her. You will lead the caravan? But your age. Caravan? But your age. He could almost see her hackles rise. She released... But your age. He could almost see her hackles rise. She released Caleb's arm... Rise. She released Caleb's arm to put her hands on her hips, and her plump, rosy cheeks grew redder for a moment. You think me a moment. You think me a child? I am 14, Eben. I am child? I am 14, Eben. Very nearly a woman grown. A woman grown. Nearly a woman grown. Our father... Grown. Our father was my age when he led his first caravan, and Halab was even younger. Theron smirked. Even younger. Theron smirked as she looked at him over Albie's head. Caleb's eyes were... Albie's head. Caleb's eyes were wide, and he looked as though he would rather be elsewhere. I meant... Elsewhere. I meant no offense, stammered Eben. I was only surprised. Stammered Eben. I was only surprised, that is all. A thought tickled his mind. Surprised, that is all. A thought tickled his mind. His mind. Albie would lead this caravan not because that was what the family wished, but because Matami was no longer there to do it himself. She lifted her chin. Do it himself. She lifted her chin haughtily, but some of the spark of anger died in her eyes. In her eyes. Well, I suppose surprise is warranted. I half died myself when Halab told me, but the more I have... warranted. I half died myself when Halab told me, but the more I have thought upon it, the more excited I have become. Will you not... have become? Will you not grow bored? He said, smiling to soften the words. Albie stuck her tongue out. Smiling to soften the words. Albie stuck her tongue out at him. I will have plenty and more to... out at him. I will have plenty and more to do. We are not only driving the carts, we will be trading... more to do. We are not only driving the carts, we will be trading... we will... we will be trading wherever we stop. That, of course, will be managed. We stop. That, of course, will be managed by others. I will have... others. I will have some oversight, but this trip is as much for me to learn as anything else. Come now. As anything else. Come now, though. I am nearly frozen through. Let us go... through. Let us go inside, and I will tell you more. They followed her back to the... you more. They followed her back to the manor, where they tramped the snow off their boots and removed them. She then led... boots and removed them. She then led them upstairs to a sitting room, smaller than the one... sitting room, smaller than the one where they often met with Halab. A servant at the door stepped forward. With Halab. A servant at the door stepped forwards, but... or stepped... servant at the door stepped forwards, but Theron spoke before he could even open his mouth. Yes, wine... in his mouth. Yes, wine, please. Something... yes, wine, please. Something fine. She blinked and looked at Eben as if it were an afterthought. That is... thought. That is, if you do not mind. I never... do not mind. I never learned my noble graces. Not at all, said Eben. With all of the news Albie had told them, he thought he could rather use... with all... said Eben. With all of the news Albie had told them, graces. Not at all, said Eben. With all of the news Albie had told them, he thought he could rather use a drink. As they waited... use a drink. As they waited for the wine, Albie took a table and put it in the center of the couches. Then she leaned over, putting objects and trinkets at various places, naming them for the cities she would visit upon her route. And Eben noticed that whenever she speaked forwards or back, she brushed against... And Eben noticed that whenever she speaked forward... whenever she speaked forwards or back, she brushed against Calem's arm. Then she leaned over, putting objects and trinkets at various places, naming them for the cities she would visit upon her route. And Eben noticed that whenever she leaned forwards or back, she brushed against Calem's arm. Naming them for the cities she would visit upon her route. And Eben noticed that whenever she leaned forwards or back, she brushed against Calem's arm. Her route. And Eben noticed that whenever them for the cities she would visit upon her route. And Eben noticed that when
Hey, Dread. Sorry to hear about the writer's block. Sorry, I was on the wrong microphone. Hey, Dread. Sorry to hear about the writer's block. Do you know what is it coming from anything?
naming them for the cities she would visit upon her route. And Eben noticed that whenever she leaned forwards or back, she brushed against Calem's arm. Here is Garsek, where we will land first. Then we follow the road west until it turns. We will land first. Then we follow the road west until it turns south and reaches Cabras. We will stay there reaches Cabras. We will stay there a while. There is no better place to find steel in all of Selvin. Then it Then it is a journey of many days to Redbrook, with little on the road to entertain, and that sits upon the Dragon's Tail. It's upon the Dragon's Tail. In each city and may up some of the towns, we will stay a short while in order to trade some goods for others, or for coin. And And, of course, to find new guards, if we should need them. The wine came, and should need them. The wine came, and Theron drained her cup at once before handing it back to the servant. The man refilled it, and then the servant. The man refilled it, and then left the bottle for them. Why should you need to find for them? Why should you need to find new guards? Said Theron. Why, if anyone should die, of course. Guards, said Theron. Why, if anyone should die, of course, said Albie simply. A caravan should always travel, said Albie simply. A caravan should always travel with at least half again as many wagoners. A caravan should always travel. Caravan should always travel with at least half again as many wagoners and guards as it needs. The roads are not safe in these days of needs. The roads are not safe in these days of war, and if some of our soldiers should be waylaid or shit themselves to death from foreign water, who will keep our goods moving safely? Eben. Moving safely. Eben balked, and Caleb spit up the little sip of wine he had just taken. To hear Albie speak so plainly of people's deaths, it people's deaths. It made Eben feel suddenly light-headed, as though he had found himself in a dream. Who was this young woman who sat before him? Where was young Albie, whose eyes would shine when he told her his dreams of the academy? Dreams of the academy. It seemed impossible she had changed so much in the short time he had been here upon the seat. Yet the only other explanation was that she had ceased to be a little girl some time ago, and he was only just beginning to realize it. Theron laughed at her frank words, while Caleb turned red. Theron laughed at her frank words, while Caleb turned red. While Caleb turned red. While Caleb turned red. Albie saw his reaction and giggled, putting a hand on his arm. "Do I shock you?" His arm. "Do I shock you, dear Caleb? You must understand I spent Caleb, you must understand I spent 2 months on wagons traveling here from... I spent 2 months on wagons on wagons... wagons. I spent 2 months on wagons traveling here from Idris, and wagoners have bawdy tongues. I would guess I can teach you a thing or two about language. Wagons traveling here from Idris, and wagoners have bawdy tongues. I would guess I can teach you a thing or two about language. Then her eyes brightened. Language. Then her eyes brightened, and she gently slapped his arm. Caleb! His arm. Caleb, you must make me a promise. Once you have finished your studies... Promise. Once you have finished your studies in the academy, you must let me take you upon a trip. Some caravan on a... upon a trip. Some caravan on a long route across the 9 lands. Mayhap not even... 9 lands. Mayhap not even to Idris. I think we might have more... Idris. I think we might have more fun other places. Her eyes flashed. Other places. Her eyes flashed, while Caleb's grew wide and starry. But Eben scowled and starry. But Eben scowled in disgust. Albie's disgust. Albie's relentless flirting seemed harmless enough most of the time, but she never left well enough alone. She never left well never left well enough alone. Eben stood quick enough alone. Eben stood quickly. We should leave. Albie frowned at him. What? But the day is young. It was Halab's invitation. Is young. It was Halab's invitation that brought us here in the first place. Yet she is gone, and we continue to take her hospitality. Besides, I have an appointment at the academy. And that... And that, in fact, was true. Astrea was true. Astrea waited for him there, the way she did every day, their visits born half from Eben's desire to help and half from his own guilt. Then why do you not... own guilt. Then why do you not go yourself and leave your friends here? Said Albie. Caleb looked like... said Albie. Caleb looked like he might agree, but Eben took him by the arm and lifted him up at once. I am... once. I am not the only one with duties at the Citadel, he said. Citadel, he said, and fixed Theron with a meaningful look. Her eyes darkened, and she rose as well. You are right. Well, you are right. I had hoped you would accompany me in my chores this evening, Caleb. Caleb's mouth turned. Caleb's mouth turned in a frown, and he lowered his eyes. In the manner, it was... In the manner, it was easy to forget about Aaron and Ezra and Dasco, but now Eben had brought memory back to the fore. Of course, he said. To the fore. Of course, he said quietly. It was my pleasure. He said quietly. It was my pleasure to see you again, Lady Drayden. To see you again, Lady Drayden. Drayden. Albie, I beg of you. Lady Drayden sounds ever too formal for such a dear heart as yourself. She held his hand tight. As yourself. She held his hand tightly in hers, until at last he kissed her fingers. Eben gave her a brusque... Eben gave her a brusque hug, and Theron clasped her wrists, before he could finally usher his friends out the door and back into the snowy streets. Chapter 3. That seemed to be...
Oh, that was nice and fast. Oh boy. Grab coffee before I start.
Chapter 3. The Firemage's Chapter 4. Chapter 3. That seemed a bit rushed, said Calum as they trudged. That seemed a bit rushed, said Calum as they trudged on. I had forgotten about They trudged on. I had forgotten about the time and remembered all at once, said Eben. It was once, said Eben. It was a said Eben. Said Eben. It was a lie, and likely Calum could hear it in his voice, but just now he did not care overmuch. They said little else, but overmuch. They said little else before they reached the academy. Its iron doors stood the academy. Its iron doors stood closed against the chill, but they opened easily. Without thinking, they made for one of the side halls, but a shrill cry stopped them all in their tracks. "Snow!" cried Melly. "Snow!" cried Melly. The cried Melly. The little old door guard thrust a spindly finger at their boots and held it there, quivering. Her eyes glowed with Her eyes glowed with madness. Her eyes glowed with madness, almost like mage light. Yes, Melly. Light. Light. Like mage light. Yes, Melly, the three muttered in unison. They went to the side. Muttered in unison. They went to the side of the front door, where an iron grate lay over a pit, where an iron grate, where an iron front door, where an iron grate lay over a pit, and tramped the snow off of their feet. Melly their feet. Melly paced behind them like a sellsword general before her troops. When they were done, her troops. When they were done, they stepped away, but Melly snatched Eben's arm and held him still, then lifted his boot up to inspect it as though he were a horse and she about to shoe him.
Fine, fine.
Shoe him.
Fine, fine,
She muttered.
So, it gets...
She muttered.
So, it gets everywhere, it does. Everything wet. Ugh.
They slipped.
Ugh.
They slipped away as quick as they could, making for the stairs to the dormitories. But once again they were... You in the dormitories. But once again they were brought up short, this time by Gia. The instructor stepped suddenly... Gia. The instructor stepped suddenly in front of them, sandy hair pulled into its usual tight bun. Tight bun. Tight bun. Bun. Bun.
There you are.
Usual tight bun. Bun. Eben, Caleb, she said briskly. I must... Briskly. She said briskly. But. Brisk. Briskly. I must see you in... I must see you in the dining hall this evening. 9 o'clock. This evening. 9 o'clock. Do not be late. That made them pause. Eben looked to Caleb and... That made them pause. Eben looked to Caleb and Caleb back at him, but each was as confused as the other. Of course, instructor, said... Of course, instructor, said Eben. But may I ask... But she had moved on as soon... But she had moved... But she had moved on as soon as he had agreed, and the question died on his lips. What could... Lips. What could she want? Said Caleb. Caleb. You do not think... Theron let the words hang. She... Hang. She cannot know about our friend. About our friend, said Eben firmly, meaning Dasco. If she did, meaning Dasco. If... Dasco. If she did, if anyone did, we would be greeted by an assembly intent on capturing us. We would not be summoned to a late-night meeting. But come, we are... Night meeting. But come, we are almost late. Our But come, we are almost late. Our friend needs tending to. We are almost late. Our friend needs tending to. I know that, said Theron. Tending to. I know that, said Theron, scowling. See to your own affairs. Until tomorrow, then, Caleb said. Tomorrow, then, Caleb set off towards the grounds. But Theron... But Theron did not follow him at once. Go, I will be there in a moment. Once Caleb... In a moment. Once Caleb obeyed, she turned to Eben. You should not think so harshly of him. Eben blinked. Harshly? What do you mean? He... You mean? He is young, and likely cannot help the way he feels about your sister. A moment passed before he understood. Your sister. A moment passed before he understood, and when he did, he scowled. You think I am upset with Caleb? You misunderstand me. It is my... Caleb? You misunderstand me. It is my sister. It is my... Stand me. It is my sister who behaves foolishly. Theron cocked her head. But she is scarcely older than he is. It is the same thing. Than he is. It is the same thing. He shook his head quick. It is the same thing. He shook his head quickly. I might once have thought... He shook his head quickly. I might once have thought so, but no longer. She is growing up a bit too fast, and while she has a good heart, I see too much of my family in her. She plays with... in her. She plays with him and with his affection. I am only trying to keep him... affection. I am only trying to keep him from pain. She gave him a sad smile. That will not work forever. sad smile. That will not work forever. But do as you will. I only wanted to mention it. Then she turned and left him. Eben glowered as he made his way up the stairs to a... left him. Eben glowered as he made his way up the stairs to Estrella's dormitory. It was all well and good for dormitory. It was all well and good for Theron to dismiss the matter brewing between Calum and Albie. If the two of them were to have a falling out, If the two of them were to have a falling out, Theron would not be the one caught between a sibling and a best friend who would not speak to each other. Then again, the thought of the two of them avoiding each other had much more appeal than the present situation. Mayhap he would let things... Mayhap he would let things play out after all. He had reached the door he sought, so... He had reached the door he sought. After all. He had reached the door he sought, so he pushed his thoughts aside and stepped in. Among Among the many chairs in the common room beyond, he spied little Estrella, where she sat by the fireplace. It burned low. It burned low, and Eben threw a new log upon the flames before he turned and sat in the chair beside hers. She did not so much as... She did not so much as lift her gaze. Good Eve, Eben said quietly. How do you feel? Said quietly. How do you fare? The same? Fair. The same? She murmured. He swallowed. I do not have as much... He swallowed. I do not have as much time as I wish, he said. Gia needs me for... He said, Gia needs me for something this evening, though I know not what. Her brow know not what. Her brow creased. Her brow creased, and she folded her arms across her chest. Very well. You do not need to come and see me if you are busy. I would not leave you alone. Not after... would not leave you alone. Not after... Her eye... Not after... Her eyes flashed as she looked at him. He fell silent. She did not like to talk... He fell silent. She did not like to talk of Isra, who had been like a sister to her. Eben supposed he... sister to her. Eben supposed he could not blame her. He decided to change tack. Change tack. Why do we not take a walk upon the grounds? He said, sitting up. He said, sitting up in his armchair. It is armchair. It is cold, but in a bracing sort of way. The air might do you good. The air might sort of way. The air might do you good. You hardly ever leave the citadel. I do not want to. Citadel. I do not want to, said Estrella. It is not good to stay cooped up, now more than ever. Come with me. Now more than ever. Come with me. It will be only a little walk. She rolled her eyes. Only a little walk. She rolled her eyes and for a moment reminded him strikingly of Albie, though the two of them could not have looked more different. Different. All right. She rose and followed. All right. She rose and followed him from the room, but he could not miss the morose stoop in her shoulders. Outside, the air shoulders. Outside, the air was bracing indeed. It made him gasp. Indeed. It made him gasp as it first splashed across his face, and Estrella huddled closer under her cloak. But after a few minutes of walking, the blood began to flow, and his breath did not come quite so shaky. Estrella, despite the deep scowl she kept upon her face, began to move more easily as well. After a time, she even threw back. After a time, she even threw back her hood. The night was dark now. The night was dark now, but the academy's grounds were lit by many lanterns hanging from the walls. How have you been feeling? Said Eben after a while. I am fine. I am fine, she grated. Except that everyone keeps asking me that, or some other version of it. It is as though they think some lever will turn, and one day I will be happy again. My apologies, said again. My apologies, said Eben. It is only... said Eben. It is only... we worry for you. Why should you? Worry for you. Why should you? You see me every day in class. Eben tried to remember how Halab had spoken to him before, so kind and gentle. Is there... and gentle. Is there any way I can help? Do you need anything? She looked away to hide her... anything. She looked away to hide her eyes. I want... eyes. I want Ezra to return. I want this all to be a terrible... want this all to be a terrible dream. After a moment, he saw her shoulders quivering. After a moment, he saw her shoulders quivering. He put out an awkward arm. Quivering. He put out an awkward arm to drape across them. I know. Across them. I know she was like a sister, he said quietly. I cannot imagine. Quietly. I cannot imagine what I would feel if my own sister were taken from me this way. Of course you can. This way. Of course you cannot imagine it, said Estrella sharply. But immediately. Sharply. But immediately she ducked her head. I am sorry. Her head. I am sorry. I did not mean that. It is all right. When she looked at him again. It is all right. When she looked at him again, her eyes were wet. She always looked. Eyes were wet. She always looked after me. Always looked. She always looked after me. In our orphanage, sometimes. She always looked after me. In our orphanage, sometimes food would be scarce. She would share hers with me, so I. Scarce. She would share hers with me, so I would not get so hungry. Some other children liked to bully me. Hungry. Some other children liked to bully me, but Ezra never let them get away with it. She. To bully me, but Ezra never let them get away with it. She could tumble anyone, even children larger than her. I have often become lonely. Larger than her. I have often become lonely here at the academy. I have often wished I had parents to write home to, or who would come and visit me. But during the day I could always go and see. Could always go and see Ezra, and she would. She began to cry in earnest, burying her face in the front of Eben's robes. He held her tightly, awkwardly. With one hand, he gently patted her hair. Her words echoed in his mind, giving him a feeling of vague unease. The girl Estrella spoke so highly. Unease. The girl Estrella spoke so highly of was nothing like the Ezra he. Nothing like the. Nothing like. Was nothing like the Ezra he had known. He still had dreams. Ezra he had known. He still had dreams, sometimes waking, sometimes in his sleep, of sleep. His sleep, of Ezra's mad eyes as she tried to kill him. He still saw kill him. He still saw Valley, his neck snapped on the stone wall, and Oren pierced by dozens of knives in the dining hall. How could the monster... Hall. How could the monster who did those deeds have been so loved by this innocent, sweet girl? It's... Sweet girl. Sweet girl. Sweet girl. It seemed even the worst sort of people had some good in them. If good in them. Good in them. Some good in them. If that was so, the reverse. If that was so, the reverse. If that was so, the reverse must also be true. And so he said, be true. And so he said, not as a comfort, but as a lesson. Even the best people Even the best people have some evil in them. Estrella evil in them. Estrella pulled away from him and kept walking. But some people do. Kept walking. But some people do worse things, and no one calls them evil. If Ezra were rich like Lilith, it's them evil. If Ezra were rich like Lilith, I think some people... Lilith, I think some people would help. Rich like Lilith, I think some people would help her. People might not call her a villain. Lilith received no... A villain. Lilith received no special privilege because of her wealth, said Eben. I saw her while she was... said Eben. I saw her while she was under the knives of the mystics. It was horrible. Mystics. It was horrible. She was like a... Horrible. She was like a broken creature. The girl shook her... Creature. The girl shook her head. Not a rejection, but a refusal to hear. The girl shook her head. Not a rejection. The girl shook her head. Not a rejection, but a refusal to hear. Eben almost pressed... A refusal to hear. Eben almost pressed the point, but then the Academy's bell began to ring. 9 times it called out. Blessed, said... Times it called out. Blessed, said Eben. I am late. Eben, I am late. Gia requested me. I will come and see you again tomorrow. I swear it. Estrella only I swear it. Estrella only shrugged. Every day, she muttered. Every day the same. She muttered. Every day the same. He put an arm... Same. He put an arm around her shoulders and ushered her back inside through one of the white cedar doors. Once a
Hey, thanks for the follow, Owl Lobster. Oh, thanks for the sub. Hey, look at that.
What a dick.
Oh man, Owl Lobster, you rock. Why you gotta be so cool? Owl Lobster. Oh, thanks, Owl Lobster. I like writing them for you. I'll tell you what.
She growled. Chapter 5.
Oh, nice. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of work, but it's a lot of fun. All right, I'm going to refill my coffee. Yeah.
Chapter 4. Once Estrella was on her way up the stairs, Eben ran for the dining hall. When he reached its wide oak doors, he nearly ran full on into Caleb, who had come from the other direction. At least I will not be the only one who is late, said Eben. I lost track of the hour, said Eben. I lost track of the hour, said Caleb, wheezing hard. He had never been hard. He had never been athletic, even for a noble-born son. After she visited noble-born son. After she visited our friend, Theron required some consolation. Eben frowned. Eben frowned. Is everything all right? Eben frowned. Is everything all right? Caleb's brows shot. All right. Caleb's brows shot for the ceiling. Of course not, Eben. How?
Booyah! What's up, Dredd?
Ceiling. Of course not, Eben. How can you even ask that? He grimaced. Later. They pushed open the door. He grimaced. Later.
There you are. Ugly little mouth noises. Problem solved? Just leaving it like that? Okay. Good on you for solving the problem. He's big help.
He grimaced. Later. They pushed open the doors and entered the dining hall, but both of them froze in the doorway, for they found they were not the only ones present. Many other students had been Many other students had been called, and all had been called.
I see you, you son of a bitch.
Had been called.
I have to talk to my waveforms. It's just part of the process.
Been called, and all of them were sitting at a few tables near the entrance. Some looked up curious. Some looked up curiously to see them standing there, but most kept their eyes on Gia. Curiously to see standing there, but most kept their eyes on standing there, but most kept their eyes on Gia. The instructor stood at the head on Gia. The instructor stood at the head of the little group, watching them all with a keen eye. She seemed She seemed ready to give a speech, but it did not appear she had started yet. As soon as she saw Eben and Caleb, she waved them to the benches at once. Come, come, sit, she said. At once. Come, come, sit, she said. There we are. Excellent. Now, I believe... Excellent. Now, I believe we may begin. The other students began to quiet down, but Caleb whispered... Quiet down, but Caleb whispered quickly in Eben's ear, Why are we here but not Theron? What is this? Eben shrugged. Eben. Theron. Eben, what is this? Eben shrugged. What's this? Eben shrugged. Gia lifted her chin. This? Her chin. This, she began, is a dangerous time, not only for the Academy, nor this time, not only for the Academy, nor for the seat, but for all of Underrealm. The High King is all of Underrealm. The High King is beset on all sides, and she requires the help of every one of us to preserve the 9 kingdoms. She paused for a moment. The dining paused for a moment. The dining hall settled. She paused for a moment. The dining hall settled to silence. Eben and Caleb stared at each other. Eben was even more mystified than before. Suddenly, Gia shook her head as if she had remembered something. Yes. Remembered something. Yes, she requires our help, she went on. But some may help more. She went on. But some may help more than others. Some have greater strength than others. Some have greater strength of arms, or spells in our case. Some have larger armies, and some have deeper case. Some have larger armies, and some have deeper pockets. These must aid her according pockets. These must aid her according to their means, but it begins at the very roots, with each one of us, and not with the grand schemes of the kingdoms. Who better to defend Underrealm? Who better to defend Underrealm against its enemies than the noble families of which you are a part? A short time ago, Lilith had the wise idea to form a group of you for just such a purpose. The Goldbags. The Goldbag Society, I believe she called it, though it is an uncouth name. Eben's blood ran cold. He looked at Caleb. He looked at Caleb. The boy's face. The boy's face had gone elf white. A quick glance around the room confirmed it. Eben saw no one there but the children of merchants and royalty. These were the same children Lilith had called together when she was under Ezra's mind word. Gia spoke on, but Eben could scarcely hear the words. He leaned over to whisper in Caleb's ear. She is here. Here. She cannot be, said Caleb. be, said Caleb. How could... Caleb. How could... No time... Good. No time for wondering now, said Eben. Go... said Eben. Go and fetch Theron as quickly as ever you can, and tell her to... You can, and tell her to bring Kakit's amulet. Caleb nodded. Kakit's amulet. Caleb nodded, but then gave Gia a wary look. Slowly he...
Thank you, Foghorn.
A wary look. Slowly he stood from his bench. Gia seemed to take no notice, but only continued her speech. Step by step, Caleb backed away, edging towards the door of the dining hall. Some students caught the motion. Some students caught the motion and stared, but Gia droned on regardless. It was as though she did not even... It was as though she did not even see him. Eben's stomach did a flip-flop. She did not even see him. Eben's stomach did a flip-flop. Caleb turned and ran, vanishing into... Caleb turned and ran, vanishing into the academy's hallways. Eben looked about him carefully. Other than the... Eben looked about him carefully. Other than the few tables near the front, the dining hall was nearly empty. The dining hall was... Dining hall was near the front. The dining hall was nearly empty. But the dining hall was nearly empty. But there, at the back of the hall, he spied the door of the hall. The hall. He spied the doorways leading into the kitchens, which were now dark and looked abandoned. One of the doors was abandoned. One of the doors was ajar. He stood from his doors was ajar. He stood from his bench and walked towards it. Gia took no... He stood from his bench and walked towards it. Walked towards... bench and walked towards it. Gia took no more notice of him than she had of Calum, though some of the students watched him go. He hesitated. Watched him go. He hesitated on the threshold of the kitchens for a long moment, trying the threshold of the kitchens for the kitchens for the kitchen of the kitchen of the kitchen threshold of the kitchen the kitchens the kitchens of the kitchens for a long moment, trying to let his eyes adjust to the darkness. But when at last he could see inside, no one was in sight. Heart thundering in his ears, he stepped into the darkness. The dish... Darkness. The dish room was empty. An oak door in the corner opened into the kitchens proper, and Eben saw that it, too, was ajar. He crept... was ajar. He crept carefully forwards, muffling each footstep as best he could. It was darker. It was darker still inside. No lanterns were inside. No lanterns were lit here, and no windows let in the moon's light. He longed to reach for his power so that his eyes might help light the way, but then he might be seen. So he crept forward. So he crept forwards, avoiding the tables around him, which might send dishes clattering to the floor if he bumped them. The air smelled of meat left out too long. He thought he could hear a murmuring drawing near, and then from the next room he caught a faint glow. But something was wrong about it. In its light, he could see shapes, but not their color or distance. It was like an awareness. It was like an awareness rather than true sight. His mind hurt. And his eyes kept shuddering away from it. He stepped into the doorway. It was a storeroom. It was a storeroom, and here at last... there was moon's light from a window.
Ugly clicking.
Last, there was moonlight from a window high in the wall. There were barrels high in the wall. There were barrels and sacks and great barrels and sacks. And sacks in great piles all around the place, and crates stacked in its center. In one corner sat In one corner sat a girl in the robes of an academy student, only they were filled of an academy student, only they were filthy and threadbare, and Eben thought he could smell them from where he stood. Her hair was Her hair was just as dirty and hung lank around her shoulders. It was lank around her shoulders. It was Ezra. The glow that It was Ezra. The glow that shone from her eyes sent a lance of pain through Eben's head. She was facing eyes sent a lance of pain through Eben's head. She was facing away from him, but it leaked around her edges like a malicious, oozing thing, a poison that sought the mouth and nose to slither in and choke the breath. The breath. At first, he could not force himself to move, or even to think. When at last he did, he grew curious what it was that she was doing. She remained hunched over, her back to him, and the feverish rasping of her voice bounced harsh off the stone walls into his ears. He took one step forwards, every moment a skipping ears. He took one step forwards, every moment a skipping of the heart, a fearsome clenching in his gut. A few paces in, his gut. A few his gut.
His gut.
Clenching in his gut. A few paces in from the door, he could at last see what it was she held in her hand. It was a lantern. At first he thought that was where the black glow was coming from, but then, looking again, he realized it was coming from her eyes. He remembered something. Her eyes. He remembered something. Something Caleb and Theron had told him about a black thing. He remembered something. Something Caleb and Theron had told him about a black glow in the eyes. Then it came to him in a flash. Mage stones. At once he At once he realized what must have happened. Gia had called the assembly in the dining hall under Ezra's control. Somehow the girl had got her hands on mage stones, and she was using the power of Mind Word once again. Eben realized he could do Once again, Eben realized he could do no good here. Quickly he no good here. Quickly, he backed away. He was almost to the door. Away. He was almost to the door. He did not. The door. He did not think he had made a noise, but Isra stopped chanting. Her head jerked up. Her head chanting. Her head jerked up, and then she turned around. Drayden. And then she turned around. Drayden. She... She growled. She growled. An unseen force snatched him up. He flew through the air and into a shelf of pots, and now made up for all the clatter he had avoided while sneaking in. The dish...
Okay, that second timer means that it's really time for me to take a break now. Oh. So I'm going to do that. Actually, I'm going to end stream. Because I have a phone call to make to a friend. And then I have a manuscript to go through. So that I can send it back to the author so that it can be published very soon. So we're going to throw a raid. Oh, thank you so much. Oops. We're going to throw a raid to Bren. Say hi to her. Appears to be writing. Like you do. Not sure what she's working on. Let's see. Oh, she's sponsored. Look at that. Anyway, yeah, so she is streaming right now. Go say hi. Wish her well in her writing endeavors today, and I will catch you tomorrow. Bye.
Since the first book was written. Holy cow! Guys, I've never gotten more than one raid in a day, I don't think. Hey, VlogaNovel, thank you so much for the raid and welcome in. Thank you, I will happily